President Biden's poor performance in the debate against former President Donald J. Trump has prompted widespread panic and pessimism within the Democratic primary over Mr. Biden's status as their presumptive nominee. As the president is said to be weighing his political future, some Democrats are raising the possibility of nominating an alternative candidate and considering a roster of names. At the top of the list is Vice President Kamala Harris, whose status as Mr. Biden's running mate makes her an easy candidate for the party to turn to as an obvious successor. But a crop of Democratic governors and other figures are often mentioned as well. A candidate switch would most likely require Mr. Biden to agree to step aside. The risks of him doing so are real. Some of the highest-profile figures listed below have never endured the vetting and road test of a presidential race. There is a long list of candidates who looked great on paper and withered on the campaign trail. "It's not as easy as it sounds," said Barbara Boxer, the former senator from California. "Being vetted for president is like no other vetting. We don't know how these people would do." Here are a few of the contenders being discussed. Kamala Harris. Vice President Harris, a former prosecutor and senator of California, has at times struggled to define her role at Mr. Biden's side. Initially charged with addressing polarizing and intractable issues like illegal migration and voting rights, she has been viewed by Democratic donors and supporters of Mr. Biden as a potential political liability. Though those concerns have eased, she has been weighed down by low approval ratings that are barely higher than the president's. Still, Ms. Harris has for months stumped for the president as one of his main campaign surrogates. She has recently become the White House's lead voice as a defender of abortion rights. In March, she met with abortion providers at a clinic in St. Paul, Min, in what is believed to be the first visit by a president or vice president to an abortion clinic. And Ms. Harris, the nation's first black vice president, has worked to shore up Mr. Biden's vulnerabilities with black and young voters. Democrats have long worried about how she might fare against Mr. Trump, though Ms. Harris has in recent months sharpened her attacks against the former president, particularly on abortion, in an effort to demonstrate she could hold her own against him. Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom of California, the former mayor of San Francisco, who also previously served 2 terms as lieutenant governor, has become one of Mr. Biden's main surrogates during this campaign. He was almost first out of the box defending Mr. Biden's performance in Atlanta. He brings some clear benefits. He is an accomplished campaigner from a big state who has used his platform in Sacramento and appearances on national television to make the case against Mr. Trump and for the Democratic Party. He has not shown any reservations about Mr. Biden, but has waited on the sidelines in case Mr. Biden somehow did not end up on the ticket and, in any event, openly considered running in 2028. But California. For one thing, Mr. Newsom would be saddled with explaining the problems California has had over the past decade: homelessness, high taxes, escalating housing costs. He will probably never be able to escape his decision in 2021 to attend a high-priced birthday dinner with lobbyists at the high-end restaurant The French Laundry. All that said, should Mr. Biden decide to end his run, Mr. Newsom could benefit from the shortened campaign. It would offer less time for opponents to explore and amplify some of those potential shortcomings. Gretchen Whitmer. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan has risen quickly as a national star of the Democratic Party, helped in part by Mr. Trump's antagonizing her as that woman from Michigan. A 2-term governor, Ms. Whitmer led a 2020 campaign that gave Democrats in the battleground state a trifecta, exercising full control of the legislature and state government for the first time in 40 years. She has used that mandate to enact a laundry list of progressive policies. Her national profile also soared during the pandemic when she was vilified by right-wing media and Republican officials for her lockdown measures. And Ms. Whitmer is a vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, a top leadership position in the National Party. For all of these reasons and more, she is near the top of nearly every Democrat's list of strong candidates for 2028, and she has recently nodded to her post-Biden presidential ambitions. Most important, she comes from a swing state that likes her. She won re-election with more than 54% of the vote in 2022. J.B. Pritzker. J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, the billionaire heir to the Hyatt Hotel's fortune, has stood out as a Biden surrogate for his knife-twisting insults against Mr. Trump. When the former president was convicted in his New York criminal trial, Mr. Pritzker broke from the carefully worded talking points of most Democrats and hammered the former president as a felon, a racist, a homophobe, and a grifter. That fiery demeanor and his caustic attacks against Mr. Trump have earned Mr. Pritzker applause as he stumped for Mr. Biden across the Midwest. He also has a significant progressive record as a two-term governor, scoring notable victories on abortion rights and gun control, and he has shifted the state Democratic Party far from its traditionally center-left politics. Another obvious advantage for Mr. Pritzker is his enormous wealth, estimated at around $3.5 billion. Mr. Pritzker's fortune makes him America's wealthiest elected official, and he is not shy about using those funds on his political ambitions. Campaign records show he spent a total of $350 million on his two campaigns for governor. Josh Shapiro Gov. Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, the former Attorney General of the state, is known as a measured leader who has emphasized bipartisanship and largely focused on non-ideological issues during his term in office. Mr. Shapiro, who won the governor's mansion in 2022, had a job approval rating of 64% in a recent survey, with just 19% of registered voters in the key battleground state saying they disapproved. In contrast, 41% of those surveyed said they would vote for Mr. Biden in November. Mr. Shapiro often talks about his Jewish faith and has plunged into a fierce divide in the Democratic Party over pro-Palestinian student protests, passionately defending his support for Israel and denouncing some of the recent demonstrations as anti-Semitic. But this is the most important thing to know about Mr. Shapiro. He is the governor of Pennsylvania. And if there is such a thing as a must-win state for any Democratic challenger to Mr. Trump, Pennsylvania would be it. Mr. Shapiro defeated his Republican opponent in 2022, Doug Mastriano, with 56% of the vote, a figure that is sure to be top of mind for Democratic delegates making this kind of decision. Other possibilities. This list is not exhaustive. The kind of chaos that could be unspooled at the Democrats' convention in Chicago if Mr. Biden withdraws allows for all kinds of possibilities. Among the conventional ones, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and Senators Cory Booker of New Jersey and Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. All three have run for president before and are familiar to Democratic voters. Gov. Andy Beshear of Kentucky, who won re-election in 2023, has also gained national attention for his unlikely success as a Democrat in a red state where Mr. Biden is deeply unpopular. Mr. Beshear defeated his Republican opponent, Daniel Cameron, by 5 points, even as other Democratic candidates in statewide races lost by overwhelming margins. In an interview on CNN on Tuesday, Mr. Beshear said he was flattered that his name was being floated, but, he added, "President Biden is our nominee, and I don't want to speculate." And finally, to people who have already lived in the White House, Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama. Former President Barack Obama, while still polling fairly high among registered voters, is barred by constitutional term limits from running for a third term. Biden tries to silence his doubters by lashing out at the elite. He was the favorite of the Democratic Party elite. He had been around for decades, knew everyone who was anyone, was a regular habitué of Sunday talk shows, and appeared to be the safest choice to take on President Donald J. Trump. 4 years later, President Biden is now aggressively attacking the establishment that once formed the core of his support, deriding the elites, the pollsters, the pundits, the donors and Baki members of his party, while making himself out to be the victim of unfair persecution. "I don't care what those big names think," he declared this week. As he faces perhaps the most perilous moment of his political career, Mr. Biden has switched from defense to offense, taking a page out of his predecessor's playbook to try to quash an internal uprising over his age and capacity. Rather than just try to show that he is up to the job, Mr. Biden has opted to push back against those who say he is not. Reassurance did not work, but recriminations might. "He has to show he's a fighter that's critical," said Cornell Belcher, a Democratic pollster who worked on Barack Obama's presidential campaigns. "They see him as weak, not strong, which is connected to being too old," Mr. Belcher said, referring to voters. He added, in an odd way, this fight might help him. The problem for Mr. Biden is that the doubts about his continued candidacy are not, in fact, only held by elites, pundits, and donors. In interviews and surveys, many Democratic voters have made clear they share the uncertainty about Mr. Biden's ability to beat Mr. Trump in the fall, or serve another 4 years as president until the age of 86. A poll by the New York Times and Siena College after Mr. Biden's June 27 debate with Mr. Trump found Democratic voters split right down the middle, with 48% saying Mr. Biden should stay in the race, and 47% saying they would prefer another candidate. But the president's approach has rubbed some of his allies the wrong way. Paul Begala, a longtime party strategist and former advisor to President Bill Clinton, who calls himself a Biden Democrat, expressed frustration on Tuesday that the president and his team had gone after Democrats like David Axelrod, a former senior advisor to Mr. Obama, who have been outspoken about their concerns about the president. "In my list of villains, Donald Trump is a bigger villain than David Axelrod, okay?" Mr. Begala said on CNN. "I'm really tired of them attacking Democrats of good faith who are really worried that Biden will cost us the House, the Senate, and the White House. I guess I'd give them that advice. If you want to unite your party, try attacking Trump a little bit instead of these mythical Democratic elites." Former Representative Tom Malinowski of New Jersey, who has been staying in touch with his former House colleagues, said the debate about Mr. Biden's future should be conducted in a thoughtful, respectful way. Once the decision was made, he said, Democrats needed to be unified to stop a liar, dictator-loving sociopath from becoming president. "I get what he's doing," Mr. Malinowski said of Mr. Biden. "Some of the discourse you see online is not very thoughtful or respectful. It obviously needs to be totally respectful of him, but also of those in the party who disagree about the best way to protect his legacy." Mr. Biden came out swinging this week after failing to convince many Democrats that he should stay in the race given his confused performance at the debate. He seemed particularly frustrated that no one was taking his insistence that he is remaining a candidate as the final word on the matter. His letter to congressional Democrats and a phone call into Morning Joe on MSNBC on Monday were meant to put an end to the internal debate over his future and to force the party to accept that he will still be their nominee. The effort seemed to slow the erosion for a while, heartening Mr. Biden's advisors. But it did not end the matter. Representative Nancy Pelosi of California, the former speaker and one of Mr. Biden's most important Democratic allies, went on the same television show on Wednesday morning and spoke as if she did not consider Mr. Biden's statement to be definitive. "It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run," she said. "We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short." The actor George Clooney weighed in with an opinion essay in the New York Times on Wednesday, just weeks after hosting a lavish, record-setting fundraiser for the president in Los Angeles. "It's devastating to say it, but the Joe Biden I was with 3 weeks ago at the fundraiser was not the Joe Big Effing Deal Biden of 2010, Mr. Clooney wrote. "He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate." Mr. Biden's feisty tone this week was part instinct and part strategy. A graduate of the University of Delaware and Syracuse University's law school, Mr. Biden has long had a chip on his shoulder about Ivy Leaguers and others he perceives to be elite, even as he assiduously worked for decades to be part of their club in Washington. Even in the past 3.5 years, sitting in the Oval Office, he has nursed resentments toward those he believed underestimated him. He is still upset at newspapers that endorsed rivals during the 2020 Democratic primaries and commentators who doubted his ability to pass major bills that, in many cases, he did eventually sign into law. Encouraged by his staff, Mr. Biden has convinced himself that the prognosticators were wrong about elections in 2020, 2022, and 2023, and therefore they are wrong again when they predict disaster for a Biden-led ticket this fall. That he chose to go on Morning Joe to criticize elites, of course, carried its own irony, one that he seemed to recognize in the middle of his denunciation. "I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now I'm not talking about you guys, the elites in the party. Oh, they know so much more," he said. Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, said Mr. Biden's combativeness was second nature. "It really, truly is who he is. At his core, to fight not just for himself, but what he believes in," she told a briefing. "And he has seen this over and over again. People count him out. People say he's not going to win. People say, all of the negative things that they want to put at his feet, and he proves them wrong over and over again." His tone has been reflected, even previewed, by his campaign operation, which from the early days in the debate backlash began blitzing out emails and fundraising appeals assailing the Democratic bedwetting brigade and the various left-leaning columnists and editorialists who have called for him to drop out. President Biden and his team are exhibiting the only posture that they can if he's to stay in this race, which is vehement, absolute statements about where the campaign stands, said Bill Burton, a Democratic strategist and former deputy press secretary to Mr. Obama. Otherwise, the media will look at any half-step backward as a signal that the whole thing is done. But some of Mr. Biden's allies said he risks alienating the very people he needs to win the race. President Biden would surely agree that unity is not something you just declare, said Adam Green, co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which has worked closely with the White House on economic messaging. Lots of everyday voters and down-ballot Democrats who need to win for the sake of democracy still want to see this president vigorously fight Trump and Project 2025, he added. Biden should relish the challenge, saying "Watch me, not shame on you, or this conversation is done." Donald J. Trump's running mate search, as much a theatrical production as a political one, is now in its final act. In exactly 1 week, the Republican vice presidential nominee is scheduled to address the party's convention in Milwaukee. The leading contenders, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, Gov. Doug Burgum of North Dakota, and Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, have sat for repeated cable news interviews. They've attended campaign fundraisers, mingled with members of Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, and flown on the Trump plane. And they've all completed perhaps the most crucial test, addressing the devoted core of the former president's MAGA movement on stage at a Trump rally. Mr. Trump has orchestrated his months-long selection process with the flair and finesse of a seasoned marionette puppeteer, relying on dramatic pronouncements to feed speculation, draw in his audience, and try to redirect any lingering attention away from his 30 for felony convictions. Now, in true Trumpian fashion, the finale includes a bit of suspense. Just one public campaign event remains on Mr. Trump's schedule before the Republican National Convention, a rally in western Pennsylvania on Saturday. Several of the former president's allies believe he may want to bring his running mate to the rally. Some aides are preparing for the possibility that Mr. Trump will announce his pick on social media just before the event. Mr. Trump's preference, however, seems to be revealing his pick in a made-for-television announcement on stage at the convention. When asked in an interview on Monday about the timing of his announcement, he spent much of his answer talking about craving such a moment. "I'd love to do it during the convention," Mr. Trump said on Fox News. "It would be a very interesting build-up and important for the convention." But the former president also acknowledged a rather significant problem with such a situation. He might be the only person in his campaign who prefers that timing. The endless speculation has fatigued many Trump allies who are eager for him to announce his decision. Pushing it to next week would disrupt the Trump aides who are working around the clock to iron out innumerable logistics to prepare for the 4-day convention, which is expected to draw more than 50,000 Republican officials, activists, donors, and members of the media. Another example of a complication with a reveal in Milwaukee. Convention rules require the party to nominate its presidential ticket on Monday, and it would be hard to nominate a ticket that's not yet officially announced. Republicans could vote on a rule change, but that would be just one of many changes that would ripple across the convention program. "My people say that's a little complicated," Mr. Trump said during the Fox News interview, suggesting his timing for an announcement would be most likely probably a little before the convention, but not much. A campaign spokesman said that only Mr. Trump knows who he will select, and that he will announce the decision when he is ready. On Saturday, Mr. Trump will visit Butler County, PA, a predominantly white and largely rural area about 50 miles east of the Ohio border that has long supported Republican presidential candidates. The county is nestled in a region near the state's western border where pro-gun, pro-coal voters, less diverse and less highly educated than the rest of the state, have mostly shed past ties to the Democratic Party and have become reliable Republican supporters. The location would seem to be an ideal setting to introduce Mr. Vance, the former venture capitalist and best-selling author of Hillbilly Elegy. He would appear to offer more natural appeal to Mr. Trump's white, working-class base than would Mr. Burgum, a wealthy former software executive, or Mr. Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants and a fluent Spanish speaker. Another potential hint: one of the closest Ohio towns to Butler County is East Palestine, where Mr. Vance and Mr. Trump teamed up in February 2023 to criticize the Biden administration's response to a train derailment that forced residents to evacuate and escape toxic chemicals. The White House pushed back at the time by accusing the Trump administration of having dismantled safety measures that were meant to prevent episodes like the East Palestine derailment. Just 5 months earlier, when Mr. Vance was running for Senate, he joined Mr. Trump at a campaign rally only to be mocked by the former president, whose endorsement had helped deliver the party's nomination to Mr. Vance. J.D. is kissing my ass. He wants my support so much, Mr. Trump told the crowd. But after the East Palestine event, which Mr. Trump later described to aides as an effective and energizing campaign stop, he has been more generous when speaking about Mr. Vance. At a campaign rally in Ohio in March, Mr. Trump mentioned Mr. Vance at least a dozen times, including once to express some mix of surprise and relief that the first-term senator has really turned out to be great. When you endorse somebody you don't know, you think they're going to be good, and they turn on you, Mr. Trump said, adding that Mr. Vance was a young star, and he's a great senator and a real fighter. Mr. Vance briefly joined Mr. Trump on stage, where he attacked Mr. Biden, praised Mr. Trump and claimed, mostly incorrectly, that all of the net job growth under Biden's presidency has gone to the foreign-born. Let's rebuild prosperity for America's citizens and re-elect Donald J. Trump, Mr. Vance said to Cheers. In May, Mr. Trump invited Mr. Burgum to a rally in Wildwood, N.J., where the former president praised the governor's intellect and business acumen. Mr. Burgum, a mild-mannered-to-term governor, engaged the crowd in an energetic call and response about sending Mr. Trump back to the White House. Okay, one more time, and this one has to be so loud that they can hear it in Biden's basement in Delaware, Mr. Burgum said to laughter and applause. On Tuesday, Mr. Rubio became the last of the three leading vice presidential contenders to join Mr. Trump at a rally this year. Mr. Rubio has not campaigned for the presidential ticket as overtly as Mr. Vance or Mr. Burgum, both of whom are relative newcomers to Mr. Trump's political orbit. Mr. Rubio, however, quietly developed a close relationship with Mr. Trump during their 4 years together in Washington. On stage at an event at Trump National Door All Golf Club near Miami on Tuesday, Mr. Rubio displayed his self-assuredness by gently ribbing the former president. He feigned ignorance about knowing the golf course's owner and urged the crowd to plead with the former president to find an indoor venue for his next summer rally in South Florida. Mr. Trump thanked Mr. Rubio, describing him to the crowd as someone who has really become a friend of mine. We had a vicious campaign for a while, Mr. Trump said, referring to their caustic rivalry during the 2016 presidential primary. He was tough, and he was smart, and I got to really know him well over the years, and he's a fantastic guy. He left it at that, keeping the suspense alive.